And good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. It's Friday the 13th, by the way. And if you're with us, welcome. This is the Food Safety Chat. Pull up a chair and join us for a 1 hour discussion of all things food safety. If you're new to the channel, we live stream on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at this time every Friday. So 10 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Mountain Time where I'm at, 9 a.m. where Kara is at. And we bring in an expert in the food safety field and we have a conversation. And that's what's kind of really cool about this is that you'll notice is this is not a presentation. This is meant to be a discussion, helping people get a broader understanding of food safety. Because I know, right? I don't know everything, right? And anytime where today is going to be a gorgeous day. It's going to be in the 50s here.
Oh, wow.
Snow is melting and all those type of things. How are things looking in your neck of the woods?
It's cold. So today our high is something like 20 and it's super windy. So it feels like 17 and we have no snow. So I would love to have snow, but I'm a true Wisconsin girl. I want the snow. I want to do snow
stuff. Gigi, good morning. Nice to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. Carol, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Stephanie in Germany. I love it when Stephanie's able to join. Shenandoah Valley. Carol is there. I used to love, so when I was with White Wave Foods, they have a plant in the Shenandoah Valley in Mount Crawford. And I used to love going there. And there's what's kind of neat sometimes if you travel a lot is you kind of get some inside tips and tricks. And there was this bed and breakfast that I used to stay at. And so instead of staying at the Holiday Inn or whatever that we normally stay at, I would stay at this bed and breakfast. It was actually cheaper than the hotel and it was gorgeous. I loved going there.
That's really cool. I always love those types of finds, right? When you travel.
It helps kind of, break it up, right? Because a lot of times, and I'm sure, Kara, with all your traveling, you've been there too, right? You wake up in a hotel room and you're like, okay, where am I?
Yeah. Right? Or if you have to turn in your key and you have a couple keys and you're like, uh-oh. There was
one. So Carol's from Rockingham. Very nice. So one of the things, and I'm always guilty about this, and if you invest the time and participate in the chats on Fridays, I always want to jump into the topic right away. But we have a ritual here. Everybody, please join us for a morning drink, or in Stephanie's case, Friday afternoon drink of your favorite beverage. Very nice. Good way to start the day. Get that dopamine going. Okay. So today's topic, I think, right? So what we always trying to do on the chat is stay relevant and what's going on in the food safety world. What are the recalls? What are the different actions? What's FDA up to? All these type of things. And today's conversation is something I think that is really important. And if you're glossing over it, this is a big mistake, right? Everybody on this call, I'm sure, knows that FDA is added to the list, right? Forever it's been the big 8 allergens. Now it's 9. And they've added sesame to that list.
It's really, that's a big change. And I don't think people outside of the food industry probably don't recognize what a big change that is for the industry, and especially for those that deal with sesame.
Right. And so one of the things I always would try and communicate within companies to marketing and sales and other groups that were, customer facing, is that when you're adding additional layers of complexity to products, it's not an additive process. So what do I mean by that? So what I'm saying is if you have 8 allergens and you add another allergens, it's not 8 plus 1. It's really 8 times a multiple of complexity, because now that new allergen that's been introduced into the mix, if you have it in your facility with other allergens, the complexity goes way up because now you need to relook at everything. And this goes for label claims too, right? So non-GMO and gluten-free and soy-free and all these type of things. Anytime you add this information, it makes things just that more complex. And really, Kara, I think this is, especially here with the new year as well, this is the perfect time to go back and look at your systems and look at your processes and reevaluate and use this to say, okay, well, I think I'm okay. I need to make sure I'm okay.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's a perfect time to do that, right? The start of the new year's kicking it off. And you have to look all the way through your process too, correct? For that cross contact prevention, for incoming ingredients, new labels that might come through, things like that. It's a great time. And especially with this change.
Yep, because one of the things, and we've had a recent conversation around this with your hazard analysis and how important this is. So you really need to take a look at your food safety plan in your prerequisites and your preventive controls, right? So one of the main preventive controls is allergens. And so you need to go back and take a look at this and say, okay, what additional risk is going forth in my operations? What additional things do I need to be looking at? What should I be worried about, right? And so for me, I did a kind of a little mini exercise. And what's kind of cool about this is we're going to be sharing this here today and going through and showing you some of the resources I found for this. And you can do the same thing. I'm going to post these resources in my locals group, and we will give the listing for that here later as well. But one of the first things I would do, right, is if you're looking at this and say, okay, well, what's going on with sesame, right? And one of those things that I like to do then is look at the recalls. And if you're unfamiliar with the website, Sean Stevens at Food Industry Council, I'll put this in, and it's council like a lawyer, S-E-L, foodindustrycouncil.com, has put together a fantastic recall tool that is free. And you can go on his website and go there and look up recalls. And so I went there, Kara, and looked at the recalls to see if there's been any action here in 2023 and things like this. And it's been actually pretty quiet, right? So good news on that front, right? Is yes.
That is good. Yay!
Yeah. So no recalls so far. So that's a good thing, right? That's a good place to start.
And I'll stump that resource that's a great resource. What an awesome way. And if you've not heard him speak in the past too, I would encourage you to go to his next speaking engagement. He's really an engaging speaker.
Yeah, he's a really good presenter. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he does annually, I forget what conference it's at, but he will do a fake trial, a food safety trial. Mm-hmm. And then ask people to decide, it's like, okay, you're part of the jury, guilty, not guilty, these type of, and they'll talk through. And like any good lawyer, right? Lawyers are lawyers because they're good at arguing, right?
Right.
He's able to present both sides, right? It's like, right. And you go into it saying, oh yeah, completely guilty. And then he'll switch it. And then you're like, oh, well,
like
maybe,
food. Yeah.
Maybe, right?
I'm part of the Wisconsin affiliate of the IEFP, and we had him come and talk it was virtual at the time because it was during COVID, and do one of those mock trials. And it was one of the most engaging presentations and one of the highest feedbacks that we've gotten too. Mm-hmm. So that was really awesome. And I agree with you. You're like, oh, guilty. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh.
Right. And Austin, who is on our call, good morning, Austin. That's what he does a lot with as well with training, right? Is people learn better when you present information as a story, right? And a trial is a story, right? We watch like CSI and these crime shows, right? And that's how we learn. And that's a very effective way of instilling information for people. So good work out there with Sean and good work with Austin. So back to our sesame topic, right? So part of this is, okay, how do people use sesame, right? And going through and saying, what are some of the main uses for sesame? And a lot of times it's kind of surprising just how many applications there are, right? It's a staple. And I didn't know this, right, from looking at the information on sesame, right? It originated as a wild plant that was cultivated and domesticated in India. And then it kind of spread from there. And you kind of see this reflected in the food, right? Sesame is a huge part of the Indian diet and all kinds of food that they eat. And even when you go to restaurants, right, the little breath fresheners with the licorice and, the anise type things that you have with the sesame seeds in it, right? It's everywhere. And with sesame too, Kara, the seeds are teeny tiny little seeds, right? Which make things even more difficult. And a lot of times too, right, they grind it up and you don't even know it's there. And with Asian dishes, right, so Japan and Vietnam and all over that part of the world, Arabian countries, things of this nature, sesame is everywhere, right? So you have seeds and pastes and oils and all kinds of things, right? So it's everywhere. And part of this then too is saying, okay, to Neil's point here in the UK, and good afternoon to you, sir, is that rules around the world are different. And what's really cool is if you're unfamiliar with FARP, right, which I always kind of mess up the abbreviation for that, right, which is the food
safety is all about acronyms, right? If you nail the acronyms, you're golden.
Food allergy resource research and resource program, right? I had to cheat. I had to go over and look at that. But one of the things, and this is a really cool, let's see here. Oops, I can present it here. I always mess up the wrong, see, so we just want to share the screen and Chrome tab. There we go. This is a super cool tool. And so FARP, so Kara, can you see my screen there?
Yep,
okay, great.
Sure can.
So FARP is out of the University of Nebraska, and they have a program where you can become a member. If you're not a member, I would encourage that your company take a look at that and consider supporting them because they do fantastic work. And to segue on what Neil was saying, right, is one of the things with allergens, right, is the rules are not the same around the world. And FARP has this really cool interactive page here where you can say, okay, here's a map of the world. Here's all the different types of allergens and things that people are concerned about around the world. So where is sesame part of regulations, right? So you can click on the different allergens here. So peanuts, right? So a lot more locations for peanuts, but sesame is our topic today, right? So to his point, right? So here in the UK, sesame is listed. Now America is as well, US. And we also have here this really cool chart, which lists out by country, what are the allergens, right? You also have sensitizing agents, and there's a color coding system down here as well. So you can see around the world a wide variety of different applications and uses. And this is really important for your labeling, right? So if your products are going to other countries, you need to understand this because you may need to be labeling things.
And I think this is such a cool tool.
Yeah.
It's so, because it's just, anytime you can simplify things for people, this is just an excellent tool if you are exporting to other countries, to understand so that you can be in compliance with their regulations.
Exactly. And I'm a visual person, so I like these type of things too, right? And part of this then too is you need to understand how does that impact your labels, right? And a lot of times, is this going to be a hard transition, right? Meaning you're going to cut off on a certain day and throw away all those old labels. You really can't do a soft transition. So what are you going to do on that side? And so by soft meaning you run out your old labels. Well, you can't do that now, right? It's too late. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times within companies too, Kara, it's like, who's going to pay for that? Right? Who's going to pay for those labels that get thrown away? Well, you should have been preparing for that before, but if you haven't, those things need to be figured out. And you need to make sure, and this is something I've learned from painful experience, luckily no recalls or anything, but film and artwork and these type of things are expensive, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times what happens in the plants is they get stuck in a back room. It's like, oh, okay, well, we can't use these anymore, but I don't want to take the $100,000 write-off on this label inventory. We'll hold on to that. Well, if you don't do a good job securing it, maybe somebody goes back there during second shift when they run out of film and say, oh, here's some more film. I'll just use this.
Hey, what do you know?
Recall, right? Exactly. Labeling is super important.
Yeah. And I've experienced that too, where, you put the procedures in place in order to make sure that the labels are verified but people, human error is real. And you can have several people look at it and it can still just pass along into the system. So you have to be really careful, and education is key, right?
Exactly. And with that, right, is you have those costs. And the good part of this is when the previous allergen rules went into place and the labeling requirements and all these type of things, those rules are pretty well set now. And everybody understands what needs to be done. It's like, oh, okay, well, we'll just add this new one to the list. But as we're going to talk about here a little bit here with the food safety plan and what you need to be doing on that side, you need to really back out and make sure that you're not making assumptions on things, because it may not just be what you're doing, but it's also what your suppliers are doing. And like I said, we'll talk about that here a little bit more. But you need to really, really understand that.
Absolutely. For sure. It's critical, right?
Yep. So let's kind of, take a look here at your food safety plan, because really what you need to do with this, right? And a good way to think about this always is to look at this in terms of your prerequisite and your preventive programs. Your preventive controls, right, which is pretty much evolving. And I'd be curious to see people's comments on this to see if you're seeing this too, right? The critical control point CCP terminology is kind of going away, right? Preventive controls is replacing that. Is that what you're seeing too?
I am, well, not necessarily replacing. It's depending on your regulatory body, of course, because USDA is the HACCP. But yes, it's and terminology, and we talk about this, and you talk about it all the time. The terminology is critical, and understanding what the terminology is. But yep, exactly. People, have that terminology correct is the important thing.
Yep. And before we dive into those type of things too, there's something that I was doing for this research that I saw, which hopefully companies are doing, right? Because this is a big problem. And when the last round of allergen rules came about, companies started throwing a lot of may contain statements on things. And FDA had to come back and say, no, you cannot do that. If you have the ability to clean, you just can't cop out and say, oh, may contain all allergens uncovered. Right. Well, that's, fine from a legal standpoint, but that's terrible from a food safety and a consumer standpoint.
Yeah. May contains is not a substitution for good GMPs, right? Nope. It is not. And I told you, Bryan, that, I have a daughter who's extremely allergic to peanuts, and we depend on that labeling. And I was telling you that anything that says may contains is off limits. Which limits her ability to have, fun foods. So it's, it's a really, it is not a substitution for proper GMPs.
Exactly. So if you're in a company or you're working with other companies who are moving that direction, don't, fight that, right? You don't let them add in sesame just to put it on the label and these type of things, right? Because FDA has been to that rodeo before and they're not going to tolerate it. So you need to make sure that you're taking care of sesame, bringing it into fold just with the other allergens and how you're managing all of those, and treat that appropriately. Now, if you're in certain industries, oh my goodness, that's a headache, right? So if you're in the baking industry, it's like, and you're using shared equipment and you're producing, like hamburger buns with sesame seeds on the top or bagels, everything bagel, right? Cleaning is going to be a major thing to figure out.
For sure. It absolutely is. And it's going to be really important to prevent that cross contact. And once again, here we have terminology, and not to, kind of sidetrack with the terminology, but allergen cross contact, right, is the correct terminology for that type of situation. So.
Exactly. And that's a good call out. And you need to also then look at, if you're switching, if you have shared equipment, you have allergens in your spaces and things like this. It's like, okay, well, how do I now verify? Right? And this is where companies like Hydrite come in very, very handy and very useful, right? And Kara is very good at these type of things. Is you may need to go back and revalidate your sanitation program and say, we need to make sure that we're removing this from our systems.
Absolutely. Yep. And doing all the testing and the appropriate sampling plans and things like that are all important to ensure that validation is correct. And then making sure that you continue that verification process too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. So Tia, good morning. Tia is saying, yep, in her consulting business with Jill, that they're seeing the same type of things too with small businesses. We'll just throw on a may contain statement. Not going to work. And Neil in the UK, I had a comment here as well. So businesses will have good controls already where the sesame is used whole or ground, like in a dough or paste. For me, I see greatest risk when it's used as a topping on bread rolls and one of those drops off and finds its way, right? Yeah, exactly, right. These little buggers they're everywhere, right? And we've all experienced this as consumers, right? Go to McDonald's and get a hamburger and eat it, and then look down at the wrapper that you have underneath you trying to catch all the little pieces that fall off. Sesame seeds galore.
Yep. They get everywhere. And I was telling you, in prepping for this, gaskets, things like that, they can get those things can hide a lot of sins, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, you're picking out the
yeah, exactly.
That's gross, Bryan. What are you doing? So definitely you need to look at that. And so part of your preventive controls for your allergens, right, is looking internally in your company and saying, okay, we need to validate our cleaning processes. We need to put in verification procedures, right? And this assumes that you have sesame in your plant and you're not a dedicated allergen. That's all you have. Odds are that's not going to happen. And okay, it's like, are there tests out there? Are there lateral flow tests that we can use for detection of sesame? And rinse water is a really great way of looking at that in your sanitation programs. what are our surface swabs showing? What type of programs can we put in place internally to make sure, right? So you're looking at your labels, you're looking at all of your programs on your sanitation, your inspection programs, like you were talking about as well, Kara, looking at all of these type of things through fresh eyes.
Yes, that is really important, right? Because you perhaps you weren't thinking about that in before, but as Neil had said, if you've been dealing with it, you're ready potentially. But if it's new to you, and I am curious how, and I have worked, and we've talked in the past about smaller bakeries and how they're dealing with these changes and implementing these changes.
Yeah, and now also think about this in terms of the food service industry and retail. And you're an Einstein Bagel location or something like this, right? How do you keep all of that separate? Oh,
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah. That is very true. I agree with that.
Yeah, Courtney brings up a good point here. How clean is clean? What are your limits? Absolutely. And this is something where the world of testing and the world of product marketing and labeling really can butt heads. I've worked in companies in the past and have seen this on labels all over the place, right? Where you'll have claims on the packaging that say soy-free, gluten-free, lactose-free, all these type of things. And what does free mean? Free means zero, right? So if you're running an allergen test and you know your detection limits and you're working with FARP and you understand the threshold limits associated with allergenic triggers as an overall group, right? Which this still varies by person. And you have an allergen test that is detecting at a level of, let's say, 5 ppm, 5 parts per million, and it's at 4, right? Now what do you do? Well, your label says free, right? 4 is not free. So you have to be really careful with that, right? And understand that risk that you're introducing with those claims.
Absolutely, for sure. And it's so important to understand your testing in your sampling and as Cortland said, don't forget swab release is part of validation, and absolutely right, the understanding, but that hinges on your testing, and you do have to have that understanding, and that's where again we keep stumping FARP, but that they do have a whole page on the different tests and things like that, and having the understanding about the testing too.
Yeah, and Courtney, yes, she's bringing up some great points here. In that, you need to revalidate, right? You need to make sure that those swabs work for your products and your surfaces and your type of things, right? And getting an understanding and working with those companies that supply these test kits to make sure they work for your application.
Yeah. And I told you about an instance that I had with a customer a while ago where they were using it for gluten. Again, it wasn't sesame, what we're talking about today, but an allergen. They were using it for a gluten test, and they were running their positive control and couldn't pick up the positive control. And I was like, oh, this is really strange. I can't figure it out. And all I did, I read the instructions, and what happened was their positive control was from corn, and they were actually the test required wheat or rye as a positive control. So it was something. Be understanding of your testing methodology and making sure that you're doing the right thing, because had they not run that positive control, who knows what could have happened, right? And understanding their testing. So
false positives and false negatives, both bad.
Right.
So also swab recovery, different surfaces, right? We all know from ATP testing that it's surface dependent. You're going to get different numbers from stainless steel versus Teflon or other type of surfaces. It's the same with allergen testing. So you need to understand that as well. And a lot of times too, I'm sure you teach your clients this as well, is that how you're swabbing, right? Is that person just coming in and going boop, right? Or are they really getting in there, right? You need the second one. And what's the correct method for doing that? Is it a swab? Is it a sponge, right? All these type of things are incredibly important for the tech.
And again, I always say to our, to customers and clients when I was previously a consultant, like, make sure you utilize the manufacturer of the methodology or of the testing, and understand, they can help you. They're happy to help because they want you to use their product appropriately, right? They
Mhm.
want you to use that methodology appropriately, so it reflects on them. So,
Yep, absolutely. And so, Cortland, is ATP sufficient for allergens? No, absolutely not. Right.
right.
You need to test for the protein, and there's different test kits out there for different proteins, and there's some that cover a wider spectrum of different things, right? Where you're just looking for protein in a general category, and ones that really zero in on a specific allergen, right? So you need to understand the application. All these things are really important.
Yeah, and there is a difference too between, I always call them kind of the over the counter
Yeah.
testing that you can procure and do yourself versus sending them in
Mhm.
to a laboratory where there might be a bit more a lower, like we were talking about with the ppms. They might be able to go down to parts per billion, so that making sure that you understand that too.
Absolutely. And that's a good point, is that as you're looking at this, let's say then, Cara, that you need to send your samples out to an outside lab. Guess what? You need to hold that product, right? That
Right.
needs to be under a positive release system, and you need to make sure that your preventive control qualified individual is reviewing, signing off. FDA is writing people up for this. You need to sign off as the PCQI that information is acceptable and that you release the product. And if you're doing that, you need to make sure and hold that product, because if that swab comes back and you release that product into interstate commerce under FDA rules, you've got a recall.
Right. Yep, it is. The hold and release, have a robust program, right? It was kind of like what we were talking about with the labels. If you have those extra labels that don't have it on there, is it wise to keep them in the back room just in case? Probably not.
Well, yeah, that was when I ran quality assurance. That was one of my rules, right? Is it okay? Fine. Marketing and operations can fight over who's paying for the obsolete material. That's fine, but it's not staying here. We need to move it out.
Yes, yeah, because and what's the bigger cost? The cost of the labels or a cost of a recall? I'm
Uh,
gonna I'm gonna go with cost of a recall.
exactly.
Not just
And
monetary, but brand damage and everything else, right? That goes with it. So
yeah, and we've all experienced this in food safety and quality assurance, right? Is in plants, right? We have the boneyards and these type of things where we never want to throw things away, right? We want to be cost efficient. Maybe we'll use this stainless steel for something else later on, and these things all pile up in the back, right? So you've got pest risks, pest control, these type of things, allergen risks with these labels, and now you bring all these things out. Just don't do it, right? Don't do it.
yeah.
It's awful. So we're talking about allergen control and really going back and looking at your overall programs, your sanitation piece of it, and of course now supplier verification, right? So now you've got these new risks. Well, guess what? Your suppliers may have new risks as well. So if you're sending out questionnaires to your suppliers, which you always need to do, now you need to revamp your allergen systems, right? And say, okay, do you have sesame in your plant? Do you have sesame on shared lines? What is your risk for sesame within these processes? And this dovetails in with foreign supplier verification as well, because in most cases, right, sesame isn't coming from the US, right? It's coming from somewhere else. It's being grown in India or other locations around the world. And you need to understand that supply chain.
Exactly, for sure. And because it's your risk, right? It is
Mhm.
your risk what your supplier is doing. So,
Absolutely. And as Neil was saying here as well, too, is, cross contamination
yes.
and other raw materials. And when you're dealing with commodities like this, especially on the agricultural side, right? So sesame seeds now and wheat and corn and oats and all these type of things, that equipment that is harvesting and transporting all these type of things, in most cases, is the same equipment.
Absolutely. Yep. Air handling. Oh yeah,
Mhm.
how you were talking about sesame seed. I see Cortland is saying that in the chat, and air handling systems too. You have to consider that for that allergen cross contact. Uh,
Yep.
Understanding that for that, because like you were saying, they get everywhere, and air distribution can certainly assist.
Yeah, so imagine if you have a 50-pound sack of sesame seeds in your dry warehouse and a forklift accidentally opens that sucker up, right?
Yeah.
You're going to be cleaning those things up for weeks.
For sure. I know we actually make a dish that requires us to toast sesame seeds. And I don't know
Oh,
if you've ever done that, but those things fly all over.
oh, crazy. Cheryl had a question here for us. What if you are a co-packer and you, let's see, and you half off a blended product that may have sesame oil or something of the sort, and how it's responsible for their ingredient. I'm not quite sure of the question here. How are you interpreting this, Kara?
What if you're a co-packer and you're half off a grape blend product that may have sesame seed oil or something of that sort? So perhaps something about sesame seed oil. And we had this conversation, as we were prepping for this. So you really have to be careful. Oh, that is a pre-blended product, dry product. So I'm not 100% sure, and perhaps Bryan, you have a better interpretation.
Well, I mean, yeah. So I mean, we'll address the oil piece of it, yeah, because as we were preparing for this talk, right, that's something we need to look at, and we're familiar with this with coconut oil and soy oil and these type of things, right?
Peanut oil, yeah.
Yeah, there's different ways of processing the oil, right? You can cold press, you can refine, all these type of things, and you need to understand that because it's the protein that's causing the reaction. So if you can talk with your suppliers and say, okay, we buy sesame oil from you. Yes. We need a letter from you saying that your oil is protein free and non-allergenic. And sometimes you may have cooperation with your suppliers. Sometimes you don't, because they're like, absolutely not. Our process does not remove that. Oh, okay. Well, I need to make sure that our statements and everything that we're talking about here are being addressed.
And that it's captured on your label, right? It goes back to the label, and then your cleaning procedures and everything like everything like that. So, and I believe that's what Cheryl is trying to say.
Yeah, and I'll kind of take a stab at this too from the blended thing as well too. So if you're buying a blend from a supplier, you need to understand all this, right? Because one of the things that is imperative under food safety, FSMA, and your food safety plan is you need to understand the risks of the materials that are coming into your plant. So if you are buying a blend, you're going back to that company and asking all of these questions. It's like, okay, I want to see your food safety plan. I want to understand your cross-contamination risk. I want to know what's in your plant. And if there are risks, again, right, under FSMA, if there are risks that that facility is not controlling, you need to be aware of those and control those at your facility. So you need to understand that.
Absolutely. And then you need to understand what the risk is. Do you have to put that on your label? Because it needs to be on your label, like we said, 0, right? And so that you absolutely need to make sure that is it's your responsibility. You need to understand and review their process and their procedures and their ingredients.
Yeah. So yeah, Cheryl out of here, packing a pre-blended product that we don't see any ingredients. Well, it's still, right, that's still your responsibility. It's your name, it's your company, they're your supplier. FDA is going to look at it through that lens. You need to approve them.
You need to understand what is coming into your facility. And if it does contain that allergen, then you need to have that on your label and need to have the allergen control procedures in place.
Yep, absolutely. And this then dovetails into the next part of our conversation here, which is the most important part of your food safety plan is your hazard analysis, right? And when FDA comes into your facility and they're evaluating you and they're looking at your food safety plan, that's where FDA is diving in, right? They're like, we want to understand your risks and how you're controlling those risks from a microbiological, chemical, and physical standpoint. And you need to have the documentation. And one of the rules I always teach, and if you're listening today, or if you're listening to a recording of this, pick up a pencil and write this down. Always use references that FDA themselves uses, right? Because what are they going to argue against themselves? Of course not, right? So that's always a great place to begin. You're going to be pretty solid if you do that. So one of the things that's out there, and if you're not familiar with this, is Appendix 1, right? So I figured I would show this to everybody, right? Just so you can kind of see it. And then again, I'll put all these links in locals. So for whatever reason in the chat here, it'll pull out the links. So I'm like, darn it, I wish it wouldn't do that, but it does. So guidance for industry, right? So the shorthand on this is, everybody calls this Appendix 1, right? But this is FDA's hazard analysis. Was FDA's first stab at helping industry to figure out, well, what are some of the risks out there that you need to be concerned about? And I'm on a Mac, and so this may be different on your computer if you're on a PC, but on a Mac, if you do Command F, this is I love this, right? Pulls up this nice little window, and you can put in what you're looking for. Sesame, right? So in this document, there are 21 references to sesame, and you can go through these then and see what FDA has identified as areas of concern. So, okay, what is the first reference? Okay, sesame oil. So they're saying from a microbiological standpoint, for these type of oils in this category, there's really not any flavor, liquid, oil-based sesame oil things that we're concerned about from that standpoint. Okay, great. And this is what you're doing with your team, right? Don't do this sitting in your office. Do this with your food safety team.
Mm-hmm.
Are we making dressings? Oh, well, now we've got risk for salmonella and listeria, right?
Yeah.
Et cetera, right? And so you're looking at the micro risks, milled products, edible seeds, right? Salmonella in edible seeds. To your point, Kara, right? If you are roasting sesame seeds, cross-contamination and recontaminating those seeds with salmonella, raw and roasted, look at those programs, right? There was a recall for listeria in roasted sesame seeds a number of years ago that just blew my mind.
Yeah.
And that was because of cross-contamination between raw and roasted.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a great resource. It's at least a starting point. And I agree with you, Bryan. The team, right? The food safety team is imperative to ensure that you're covering everything. And then also I always say, go out on the plant floor. Don't just do it, from your desk, like you were saying, because a lot of times you'll be sitting, even if you're sitting with your team, you're like, do you remember, does that go there or does that go there? And then you go out there and it's like, oh my gosh, it's totally different than what I was thinking about. So making sure that you get in the plant and understand, because there could be cross contact that you don't even realize until you're out actually on the plant floor.
Oh yeah. I mean, all of a sudden you find, one conveyor belt that's kind of going underneath another conveyor belt. And you're like, oh, what if something hops off that belt?
Yeah, exactly. Or people, right? What are the three sources of environment, ingredients, and people?
Absolutely.
So.
And as you're doing this risk assessment and talking with your suppliers and things like that, remember, if your supplier is dealing with sesame seeds, they're an expert in sesame seeds, right? So don't reinvent the wheel. Talk with them and say, hey, listen, we buy sesame seeds from you, and here's our allergen questionnaire. We want to make sure we're okay. By the way, I want to learn more about sesame. Teach me about sesame.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And I think it's important to talk to your suppliers and have those conversations, but then also your laboratories. And like we were talking about with the methodology, talk to the manufacturer. Don't be afraid. I used to work for a laboratory, and I was always amazed at how people didn't utilize that resource. They have lots of experts on staff, and I know they're willing to help, right?
Oh,
and
absolutely.
they're willing to provide that expertise. So it's important to tap into those resources. Like you were talking about resources, you give a lot of excellent resources on the food safety chat. There's so many out there that are just amazing, but can be utilized.
Right. It's a perfect example, Kara, and thank you for saying that, of we're all in this together in food safety, right? We are all working. It doesn't matter what company we're necessarily working for. We're all working on this together to make sure that the food supply is safe, because it reflects on us all, right? So the more that you can learn, the better off you're going to be. So
100%. And I always say I have skin in the game because I have a daughter who's severely allergic to peanuts. And so I just want to make sure that the food system is safe for those people, right? To ensure that they're not going to have to, like my daughter, end up in the hospital because of it.
Yeah, and part of it with spices as well, and sesame is kind of like a spice, in different applications and things like this, is anytime you purchase a whole spice versus a ground spice, that's an extra level of risk, right? Mm-hmm. Because if they're grinding it up, there may be something else in there. And there's that famous case now from 5 years ago or longer now, where cumin, right, where they were grinding up and putting ground peanut shells in with the ground cumin to cut the product and make it cheaper. Well, if your daughter now uses that cumin,
we still don't eat it. She has just such a fear of it. It's just it's one of those where, absolutely. It's so important to understand that and understand your risk, right? And and we know that most people are not doing that, right? We know that, but it was really a scary time at that point for her. So.
Well, and I think that's sometimes we forget, right? Because we get really involved in the technical side of things. We're doing this for people. Right. Now imagine living with that fear, right? Of seeing that, and now having to modify your entire life to avoid that spice.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Right. So if you're worried about cumin because of this issue, guess what? Right. Anything that has cumin, right? Indian foods, all these type of wonderful foods, right? Off the table, right? She
Yep.
can't eat those anymore. That's terrible.
Yeah. And that's why I always go back to the may contains, or the,
Yeah.
the manufactured in a facility. Again, don't use that as an excuse not to do good GMPs.
Right.
Because,
Don't be lazy.
yep, exactly. Because there
And
are
if,
people, and yeah, I try to put a face to it, right? You try to put a face to the allergen piece of this. So.
right. Yeah. We're in this business for people. Right? We are making and selling products for people to eat. Right.
Mhm.
And the more that you remember that, the better off you're going to be. And if you're able to put programs and systems in place that give that level of comfort and that confidence to people who have these afflictions and these things that they need to worry about, that's a competitive advantage, right?
It
If you're
is.
able to explain these things, right? Versus the company that says, just put a may contain label on there, right?
Mhm.
Don't do that.
I agree.
Yeah.
So,
So when you start looking at this, right, and going through this hazard analysis and looking at Appendix 1, right, you're going to be starting to look at, and I did a little research on this, right, with sesame, right? So from a microbiological standpoint, salmonella, right, we saw this on the list, but also emerging pathogens that we haven't paid a whole lot of attention to in the past. Bacillus cereus, right, which anything that's in contact with the soil and type of thing, ubiquitous organism.
mhm.
FDA has guidance documents on this. And the big risk with Bacillus cereus is toxin formation, right?
Right.
And like Staph aureus, like we were talking about before, there are certain variety of toxins. And if you have certain levels of growth with BC, these toxins can be produced and they're heat stable. Right? Are
Mhm.
you looking at that in your product?
Exactly. Absolutely. And it depends on the intrinsic properties, right, of the product that can allow the outgrowth and the development of that toxin. So.
Exactly. And anytime you're dealing with an agricultural type product, on the chemical side, you need to be worried about, and of course, the allergen piece of it,
Mhm.
but also mycotoxins, right?
Yes.
So if that producer isn't doing a good job of keeping those seeds dry and these type of things, and mold grows and get mycotoxin, right? Now that becomes a threat in your product, right? So this is why you need to talk with your suppliers.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. It's so important to have that communication. And I know and I understand, we've been there, right? You've been there too, Bryan, that those conversations can be hard, or they don't happen. You don't think about them happening, but with the preventive controls regulation, it's just a must.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
robust, also, just like you were talking about, bringing it back to the hazard analysis and risk assessments. Make sure that you truly understand the ingredients and the process, and your supplier's process and performance.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point, right, as well, is okay, if we're focusing on the allergen, right, and we're looking at now microbiological risk, we're looking at the chemical, but physical too, right? So these are teeny tiny little seeds. And let's say that you're doing a hamburger bun and you've got a device that's sprinkling them on the buns after they baked. There's nothing that's going to stop, small particles or things like that may be in the seeds from going on those buns. So what are
Right.
you doing for those physical risks associated with this?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. It's uh, make sure that you're doing that hazard analysis. And like you say, I think that's a lot of time what I see anyway, and perhaps you have a different experience, but that's a real gap where a
Yeah.
lot of people struggle. And that's why that Appendix 1 at least is a starting point, right?
Mhm.
It's at least it helps you to understand and really identify your hazards that are associated with your product and your process.
Right. Yeah. There's a philosophical term that comes to mind right now. It's a Latin phrase, tabula rasa, which means blank slate. And really, when you're looking at these type of things, that's how you need to do this, right? Because a lot of times we've been in this field for a while. You
Yes.
need to look at this. And really what we're doing here with our whole conversation here today is saying, take a deep breath and stop and think about these things and don't make assumptions.
Right.
Approach this like this is all brand new. You don't know anything about these, and building out that database and avoiding those assumptions, right? And so another really cool one, and I hadn't seen this one before, which was pretty cool, is I also found this source from FDA on a risk profile. Let's see if I can pull this guy up. Risk profile on pathogen and filth in spices. 221 pages in this beautiful document, right? And again, if you do a control find for sesame, look at that. 205 references in here.
Holy smokes. Oh, okay. Was not expecting that.
Yeah, exactly, right? So here they're talking about types of spices for pesticides and salmonella and all these type of things, right? We haven't even touched on that from the chemical side for pesticides, right?
Right.
USDA does surveys on these type of activities as well. Pull that information out for sesame. But you can then flip through all these different references and say, all right, what are the risks, right? So within this study with FDA, which came out in 2017, right? So pretty recent, they looked at 526 samples for salmonella. Good news here, no positives, right? So that is helping to formulate your risk assessment. And when FDA comes in your plant and they look at your hazard analysis and say, all right, from a microbiological standpoint for your product, salmonella is a risk. What level of risk do you see this in your product? This type of information is gold.
It is. Yes. Yes.
You can pull this up and talk with the FDA and say, okay, I have this paper from you guys that goes through this risk and looks at this. And here's how we've helped to identify that, right? A lot of times in food safety plans, this part of it gets overlooked, right? Take this information,
yeah,
put together a page of all your hyperlinks to all this type of information, print it out, put it in a book, whatever, so that you can show FDA, yes, I've done my research. This is just not me saying, well, I says this.
Yeah.
Well, who cares, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Go to the references.
And I wish I had a nickel for every time that I heard, well, that's just how we've always done it. This is why, how did you set these specifications? It's how we've always done it.
Right.
You know, what's the true understanding of the ingredient or the process? It can't just be that's how we've always done it. That's how the quality manager before that person said it.
Exactly. Well, and Brandon has made a fantastic contribution here. He's going to read that entire document for us. So,
yeah, if you could give us some clip notes on that, that'd be awesome.
If you give us an executive summary, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. That would be awesome.
As Cortland pointed out too, EU and Canadian info, right? Great resources there. Other countries have been dealing with this as an allergen for a lot longer than we have, obviously. So don't overlook those other sources. Thank you. Very good point.
And they'll be great resource. And that's another thing that whenever I teach the preventive controls, we focus on obviously that it's the US regulations, but there's a lot of information out there worldwide that can be extremely useful. So don't forget to include that. Completely agree. Completely.
Yep. And that's a perfect segue. So Cortland, thank you for that. I'll give you total credit for that. So here's another resource I found from the UK. And this was actually linked through FARP. And so let's see here. So is this the right guy? Yep. So here's a paper on allergen information for sesame. Beautiful, right? Beautiful resource. Look at this, right? So you've got the clinical data, the biochemical data, right? So here's history, clinical history for patients associated with this, what type of skin testing they're doing on these type of things. Absolutely gorgeous information here for your food safety plan, right? So they're giving potential uses for these products like we've been talking about. Great information, right? Bottom line here, when we're looking at these type of resources, is don't reinvent the wheel, right? There's so much out there. When we live in such an amazing age now where this information is at our fingertips.
I think about doing HACCP plans, in the 90s and, going to the library. Remember what those are? And then and looking at the what was it? The microfiche and how
the card catalogs and the Dewey Decimal System and so the original Google, right? Dewey Decimal
exactly.
And card.
We got it done now. We got it done.
Exactly. So use those resources out there. And again, FARP. And as we're kind of coming up on time here, I wanted to get a plug for this because as I was going through FARP's site, and I have absolutely no affiliation with FARP on this. I've used them over the years, and I've found them to be an extremely valuable resource for allergens. So one of the things that I found here as well is this cool thing. is they actually do a course, and it's learn as you go, right? So you can take this whenever you want. And it's an online course on allergies, intolerances. You get this snazzy digital badge, and you can sign up for this course, and it's $50.
I can't wait to take it. I am gonna take it. It looks like a great. I know anything coming off of there is gonna be awesome. But it looks like, and how $50, you can't beat it. That's a great price point, right? From an excellent resource.
Absolutely. I'm going to try and put the link in here just to see if it works or not. So we'll see if this dude pulls up. So definitely, I'm going to take this course too. It looks awesome, and for $50, cannot beat it, right? Right. And when the FDA investigator asks you, what did you learn? How do you know, right? Well, I've taken this course, right? And the FDA totally knows who FARP is too, right?
Yes.
That just helps build to your credibility and the authenticity of your systems, and helps educate you as well.
Yeah. Well, and I can never stress enough that you need to educate your employees, the line workers and things like that. I'll never forget, I was in a cheese manufacturing plant, and a guy was dumping a bag of non-fat dried milk into a batch. And I said, "Do you have any allergens in your facility?" And he said, "Nope, no allergens." And it's like, it was in everything, right? Milk was in everything. So he didn't even consider it an allergen, but it is. And you do need to understand that. Even if it's in everything, you have to understand. So that, educating your employees to understand that.
Absolutely. And my terminology for that I use is fresh eyes, right?
Yes.
It's not that, that employee he just didn't recognize it, right? We become used to things, and we walk by things that are a potential problem every single day if you're in the plant. And it's not that you or I are geniuses. We just are fresh eyes who walk in there and say, what are you doing there? Oh, well, I've been doing this for 5, it's like, what about this? Oh, yeah. Right. Great. That's why fresh eyes are so important for finding these things.
Exactly. And it's just like you say, we've just seen a lot, right? We've been around the block a few times, and just understanding that, but just having your employees understand that too. And especially now with the new sesame, they may not have that understanding. And if they've not treated sesame as an allergen, there could be, like we were talking about, people, they stick their hands into the bag of sesame and then touch something that might not be a line or a product that contains that. Now it contains it. So.
Exactly. Or the employees go out to lunch and pick up a burger, and they're bringing sesame seeds back with them.
Right. Exactly. What's the risk, right? Where is that falling?
Right. And on that note too, right? So part of this, right, and this is kind of where, again, going back to experience and just dealing with this stuff for a long time, is that you need to look at this based upon, when you're looking at your hazard assessment. This is where HACCP really kind of had a lot of problems early on, is what is the likelihood, right? We can all come up with crazy scenarios, right? But what's the likelihood of that? Right?
Yeah.
You need to look at that in terms of that. What are the chances of a sesame seed getting into your bulk milk tank on the farm? Pretty low, right? Is that really going to happen? Well, you need to investigate that, right? And use some common sense in these type of things too, because a lot of times, and I counsel this for food safety plans as well, and it's kind of it's a statement that may or may not be true depending on the application, but I'm still going to put it out there. Is, for me, good food safety plans have less CCPs, not more, right? Because you're under control. Right. Yeah. Don't rely on those, right? If your preventive controls are going to be there, right? And they have to be there. It depends on your industry, right? Because if you're producing ready to eat, you have to have environmental systems in your preventive controls. Should you have them anyway? Yeah. Right. But it's mandatory for that. So make sure and take those into consideration when you're looking at these things, right? Because a lot of times, and this is something that's very true in quality assurance and food safety, is simple is hard, right? Putting together a program that's robust, to the point, clearly understood, and has actions that everybody understands when they have corrective actions associated with that, is really hard to do. Now, it's really easy to write a 50-page document on those type of things and throw all this information out there, blah, right?
Right.
Not helpful.
No, right? Not helpful at all. And people won't do it. right?
Mhm.
People won't do it if it's too complex, if it's too much. So you gotta hit that sweet spot, right? Where it's simple, straightforward, and understand. And I think that's where I always am probably a bit more of an over communicator, but understand why we weren't doing anything with sesame for the last 10 years. Why do we have to do it now? Well,
Mhm.
because now it is an allergen, according to
Yeah.
the government. So
Right. So yeah, you just can't take these sources and these links and then just expect everything to happen. It's like with texting with kids and things like this, right? There's one that I love there, TLDR, right? Too long, didn't read. Right? And if you're not reading it, nobody else is reading it, right? So you need to take this information and translate it to your proper application.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The cliff notes, right? We come back to the cliff notes.
Exactly. Right. So definitely, I mean, so to kind of bring this back up to the 30,000-foot level for everybody, some industries are going to have this really hard, right? Bakeries. Oh my goodness, right? Bakeries are going to have a real challenge with this, right? Sesame is everywhere in bakeries. And if you have a dry clean operation, how are you managing that, right? So you really need to step back and look at these processes. If you're in a market and you're producing products that are traditionally containing sesame, right? So tahinis and all these type of products, right? Asian food, Japanese food, Indian foods, right? It's everywhere. Within your processes, if you're manufacturing these foods, you got a lot of work to do here.
Absolutely. And hopefully you've been doing it leading up to here, and this isn't a surprise.
Yeah.
But yep, absolutely. Yeah.
And one of the things I love to do is, especially on this chat with people like you, Kara, who are so instrumental in the food safety community, is there anything out there, anything coming up, any events or speaking things that you're doing that you'd like to let people know about?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'd love it. So I'm actually putting on an environmental monitoring program. It's full this Wednesday, but we also have a Food Safety Fridays that we're putting on in February, because Food Safety Fridays in February. And it's each Friday that you can head over to our website and sign up. But we're having an update on the new era of smarter food safety, and perhaps they'll touch a little bit on the sesame. And you were talking about dry cleaning. We're having a segment on dry cleaning, accelerated shelf lives, and then we're actually having Martin Wiedemann from Cornell come and talk about listeria. Nice. Yeah, and sanitation, validation, and verification, just what we were talking about on this program. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Very nice. And so if they go to hydrite.com, will they be able to?
Hydrite, and it's HYDRITE. Yeah, they can sign up.
Put that in the comments there. There we go. And for me as well, right? One of the things that I've been talking about in this chat as well is Locals. And Locals is a really cool free community. There's a free side where I post information. There's a membership side as well. And for a nominal membership fee, there's additional information in there and other resources that I find as a special perk for those groups for helping to support these activities, right? Because it's really important these things happen. And so that's locals.com. And if you just do a search for me in the Food Safety Foundation Food Leadership Group, right, you should be able to find it. If not, fire me an email. Here it is. I'll get you hooked up on that.
I was going to say that's a great resource. I use it all the time. So thanks, Bryan, for putting that together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And one of the things on the free side that I do is every day, pretty much, I scan recalls and what's going on out there. And then I will post those in there, and I hit a button that automatically sends a notification to members. So great way to keep up. And when FDA asks, how do you keep up on food safety? Well, number one, come to the chat, right? This is helping to improve your knowledge. And you can also point to that resource and say, I get emails 2 or 3 times a week from a food safety consultant who sends me information that helps me to keep up to breast on what the latest threats are. So
it's a great resource. I can't tout it enough. So.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So with that, wow, we're out of time already.
Wow, that went fast.
And great questions, everybody. I love it. Thank you very much. Right, that's what makes it so much fun. Is this involvement and interaction? Thank you very much. So with that, we'll close out this Friday the 13th chat. Everything went good, so that's good. No gremlins got us. And we will get back here next Friday at the same time on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Twitter now again. So at the same time, so 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 7 a.m. Pacific Time. So Alexis, thank you for getting up early and joining us. And 10 a.m. Eastern for the next food safety chat. And again, guys, if you want a specific topic talked about and you want me to bring a guest on, fire me an email. Right? I love interacting with these guests and talking with Kara. I always learn something, right? And that's a good way to look at these type of things, right? Is if I gain one new piece of information that I didn't know before, that's a win, right? So take the win.
Yeah, I learned stuff too. So thank you for having me, Bryan. I very much appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. So everybody enjoy your weekend. Have a great one. Hopefully you get some snow up there, Kara, and it gets more like winter. And we will see you back here next week, everybody. So thanks again. Have a great weekend.